think many of the internationals are looking at the situation before 2006. They didn't really look at what we are doing right now. They don't want to understand what we are doing right now. To be honest, I agree with Zebello that, to be honest, since 2006 up until now, we see that there are a lot of improvement, and then UN is doing nothing. I always say to many people about the UN is only fast in doing report. But in terms of action, they are doing nothing.
What do you mean by doing nothing? What can they do? What should have they been doing in the last 10 years?
You can look at that in the village, in the sub-district. There is no UN police over there. There are only police officers working in the sub-district. I don't really agree that with James as well is saying that, well, the police is really corrupt. It's not. Now you are building, we are start building. You cannot compare a police of 8 years old with a police in New York in Australia. It's something different. They took 200 years to build this police to become a good one.
Damien Kingsbury, do you think the UN has failed in terms of trying to get East Timor's police up to scratch?
The UN has drawn from a very wide base, and many of the police that they've brought here have themselves not been at the top of the level of performance. There's no doubt about that. But there's also a cultural issue, and I don't mean Timorese culture, I mean the culture of the police force, which continues from the Indonesian period. It continued up until 2006. And whilst the Timorese police force, the PNTL, has been rebuilt since 2006, it continues to have elements of that culture in it, which are very, very difficult to resolve and to overcome. I think the real question is, yes, the UN hasn't done a great job. Sort of program will go forward into the future to assist the PNTL to become even better.
Francisco Gutierrez, what do you think that program should be?
You have to provide them a future into the institution itself, the police. We come up with we call it the promotion regime, career regime. The career regime provides them a future into the PNTL. From that, you can motivate them to start working professionally. So I think this is something we're good.
Hello, is this a question of training or is this a question of resources?
Well, it's a matter of mix, actually. Yeah, it's from the beginning, the setup itself, it has been wrong. To deal with this kind of problem, the chain command of the PNTL is still weak. FFTTL, the external security defense, are strong enough because of the chain command is strong.
Is it then fair to ask the foreign forces to leave in 2012? It really doesn't sound like East Timor's National Police can take on security at all. Damien.
Can I just say that I respect the improvements and the reforms that the government's been making. They have been making and tackling the problem, and I think we should recognise that and acknowledge that. And the UN has failed, and it hasn't done an adequate job. The question is how do we transition forward beyond 2012? Is the answer to cut out training entirely, external training, or is the answer to have a graduated process or a slower drawdown, or perhaps a smaller training force here, but a more highly skilled force, somebody who can do their job better, I think, than has been done in the past.
Francisco, would you agree with that?
We're now preparing the transition of the UN until 2012 at the end. So in 2011 March, we will take over. At least we call it the handover, the full handover. From that on, and we start at we call it five main programs with the UN. First one is about legislation. We have to prepare everything, legal basis for the police. So in terms of legal basis on accountability and everything about the rules of engagement and everything, you have to prepare
that
everything.
all looks very good on paper though, but in the past and from experience we've seen gang warfare on the streets, we've seen the police and the military clashing with each other, we've seen rifts within the military, within the police itself. Is this really a force that's able, that we can trust to take on the national security?
No, because if you look at the past, if you go in deep a little bit into the past, what's happening is they even set up the police without all the attributes, without any necessary accessories, without laws, without regulations, without proper training. Now we are revising that.
Jose Bello, are you just as confident that if regulation, if rules are set down, that the police will set aside their rifts that they will be able to take over national security?
We are billion institution. As a human being, it has to be complete. We can't only build. We can only have a leg and a head, no stomach. It's not a human being. So a police force for us is needed, and it has to be strong enough. Otherwise, this country is going to be run by the, by the gangs.
We've been talking a lot about the police and about the National Security Force, but let's talk about the judicial system here in East Timor as well. Damien, if I could throw this question to you, how confident are you of this country's judicial system? Is it strong?
The judicial system is improving, like the police force. It's an improving institution, but it is still fundamentally weak. There are still too few judges, too few lawyers. The language issue is terribly complicated. We find, for example, in Baucau, if you have a trial, the judge will speak Portuguese. It will be the evidence will be translated into Teton and then into a local language. So you have 3 layers of language just in the evidence system. And of course, there's no real rules about interpretation. So what happens is you find that interpreters actually start to embellish or change or modify evidence. So the judicial system suffers there. It is building, it is getting better and stronger. The other problem, of course, is that there is still an element of a culture of impunity where certain people can engage in criminal activities and be seen to get away with it.
Is this country politically stable enough to stand on its own feet without foreign help?
No, the first one is that you look at anywhere in the world, you cannot just stand by yourself without any external assistance in anywhere. So I think this country, we still need some assistance, but we call it a very selective assistance in terms of really getting into the situation, really get into the need of the people and helping people, Timorese, to grow. The second is, I'm quite confident. You look at the political leaders. Now we see there are change of attitude, change of mentality within the political leaders. And then you see a lot of improvement within the institution, the security institutions. You see the first thing you see, there is a good, we call it the relationship between our armed forces and the police. They are now helping each other in terms of providing security. And then we see a positive response from these persons, from the police and the armed forces.
It all sounds very, very positive. It certainly sounds very positive.
I'm quite confident in that.
You're very confident. Jose Bello, do you think East Timor can do without foreign help now, 10 years down the line?
Well, we still need the foreign help for me, but not from UN. We don't need the armed police here. I think police has let the Timorese police deal with their own problems at this stage and helping the political stability of the moment that we have. The Prime Minister under one leadership with 2 Secretary of State, that's the more effective formation that at this stage they have, instead of like in the past, the 2 ministers competing each other. So it's very stable at this stage for the defense force and then police force under one. Down the line, needs something to fix, but we need it must be more selective, as what Mr. Francisco said. So not unilateral, but bilateral support.
Damien Kingsbury.
We have to keep in mind that Timor-Leste started from zero, and it's built and it's come a very long way, and any state going through that process is going to stumble. Timor-Leste stumbled in 2006, it's back on its feet. I think it's vastly more stable than it has been, and I'm reasonably confident about its stability in the future. Timor-Leste will continue to need assistance from its friends, and its friends will be there. And I think that's the important thing, that nobody's abandoning Timor-Leste, and Timor-Leste doesn't want to be abandoned by its friends. So the question really after 2012 is what sorts of international relations does it have, and how can its friends assist it into the future?
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. And that's all the time we have for this edition of 101 East. You can always follow the program through our website, Facebook and podcast. From all the team here in Dili, East Timor, thanks for watching.
Malaysia has created the world's tallest self-installing wellhead platform. and designed the largest and most advanced racecourses. Discover Malaysia's service excellence at the Malaysia Services Exhibition Abu Dhabi. Register with Martrade.
As geeks take on dictators, bloggers turn dissidents, and social networks root for social justice, governments are going cyber, spying on their citizens, erecting firewalls like iron curtains, and closing down websites. We ask, is cyber-generated change virtual or real? Empire at this time on Al Jazeera.
Two generations face the past in order to understand the present. A young man embarks on a journey with his father in search of answers. Great changes in China have brought their traditional family way of life to a crisis point. Faces of China, at this time on Al Jazeera.
March on Al Jazeera. In 2009, Al Jazeera visited the cities worst affected by the financial downturn. Now, 2 years later, we return as European leaders discuss the debt crisis.
In a new 8-part series, Al Jazeera looks at women's rights and maternal health, real women and their personal stories.
It's 20 years since the Arab League held its annual summit in Iraq. An Al Jazeera News special has full coverage from Baghdad.
Branded a lunatic by some and an inspirational revolutionary by others, Al Jazeera follows the controversial Norman Finkelstein.
Tunisia's interim Prime Minister Mohamed Ghannouchi resigns amid fresh violence in the capital, Tunis. Hello, I'm Shuli Ghosh. You're watching Al Jazeera live from Doha. We're getting reports of gunfire in the Tunisian capital. Also coming up, Hillary Clinton says the United States is reaching out to Libyan opposition groups. Anti-government forces in Libya are preparing to defend the city of AlJazeera, just 50 kilometers from Tripoli. And another city falls. Protesters in Misrata claim victory, but witnesses say government tanks are moving in. And Libya's former Justice Minister announces the formation of a national council and warns against any foreign intervention. Fresh fighting has broken out in the Tunisian capital, Tunis. These are the latest pictures where police fired tear gas and warning shots in Tunis to disperse crowds on the third consecutive day of violence. 3 people have been killed and several others wounded in clashes between security forces and demonstrators since Friday. Well, the violence comes as Mohamed Ghannouchi announced he would step down as Prime Minister. He had planned to guide the country to elections in July after President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali was deposed last month. Here's Ghannouchi's announcement on state television.
I decided to render my resignation. I decided to render my resignation as the Prime Minister, not to avoid the responsibility. I have shouldered the responsibility since January 14th till today. Since I have rendered my resignations and I'm no longer the Prime Minister, as citizens, I have a personal view. There is a revolution, and the revolution mandates that there must be a new constitution on the basis of which the country should move forward. And this is one of the most important matters which I consider as a citizen, that the constitution is important and necessary for us in order to elect a new parliament for Tunis.
Our correspondent Nazanin Mashiri has the latest from Tunisia.
Well, Prime Minister Mohamed Ghannouchi said he resigned to prevent any further bloodshed. But in Tunis, we are hearing of deaths, we are hearing of clashes between protesters and the police. This is a developing situation there. We've seen unprecedented protests, more than 100,000 people out on the streets on Friday. Protests outside the Prime Minister's office with people calling for his resignation, saying they will not back down until he goes. He has gone, but that doesn't seem to have stopped the